Hello.
Hi, Sylvia. We're going to be broadcasting now. So let's just be on mute until all of the participants have arrived.
Got it.
Hi, everyone. We're going to start the Framing Criminal Histories webinar in just a few minutes. We're just waiting for more people to arrive. So please continue to hold. Okay, good afternoon and good morning to some of you. So we're going to get started with our Framing Criminal Histories webinar. And I have slides, or is that, oh, here we go. So this is Jessica, and I'm going to go over instructions for a conference call or for this webinar. So we are going to record this webinar. It's currently being recorded, and it will be saved and available via our website and also by our Basecamp. And it will also, we will send out the slides to everyone via email as well. Please just use your computer or telephone audio. Don't call into the webinar. If you're using computer audio, because there's usually background noise, and also to eliminate background noise, we are muting all of you during the duration of the webinar. If you want to ask a question, just go ahead and use the chat box or raise your hand, or you can enter into the questions box. If you have any technical difficulties during this webinar, please just let us know via the chat box. We're monitoring that at all times, and we'll help you out if there are any technical difficulties. This is me, and I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists for today. We have the wonderful James Apt from the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program. He's part of our evaluation and technical assistance team here, and he is a medical case manager with BHCHP. And we have the lovely and talented Sylvia Mascarello, also a member of our ETAP team, and she is the program director at Liberty Community Services in New Haven, Connecticut. And I will turn it over to these folks and then join you again for the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. You're there, Sylvia?
I'm right here. Do you hear me?
Right. Yes, I can.
Right.
All right, so we have a lot of ground to cover. As I tire of saying, it would be better if this was a discussion instead of merely a presentation. So any questions you have, or if I'm being unintentionally vague about a particular point, feel free to speak up and we will see it in our little chat window. Listed on the slide here is the agenda for today. And a lot of this is, it touches on case management themes, but sort of in the context of the legal system and working with the clients that we serve to really take a closer look at their criminal history and sort of how to discuss it with them and how to sort of work with them to how would I say this? To work with them to understand it and to nullify it for the purposes of housing and/or employment. I mean, if this were not a barrier to employment or housing, this would be a non-issue. So how we discuss it with them, it's really clear that we state our intent. So we'll go through disclosure and relationship building, a little bit about what a criminal record is, some coaching stuff, and then resources in your state. Sylvia was very good about doing some research and digging that stuff up. And then we should have some time for questions and answers after that. That's right. All right. So our objectives for today are to have a deeper understanding of how criminal records can impact the potential to obtain housing and/or employment, to become more familiar with and employ an approach that is both supportive and strengths-based, to really examine the language we use and identify terminology that can be shaming or triggering. And also there'll probably be a little piece in here about examining the terminology that the criminal justice system uses as well. And then also we want to have a better understanding of how to interpret the contents of a criminal record. So 4 very basic goals. Because we have a lot of experience in the room right now, you all have a lot of experience with some of these. So again, we want some chiming in when necessary and appropriate. Who we serve. So in the work that we do, both with this initiative and outside of this initiative, we're going to be encountering 3 different populations. People with no involvement with the criminal justice system, past or present. People who might have some activity or charges in their past, and then people with past and present legal woes. And just so coming back to one of those initial bullet points about the goals, terminology is important. This word criminal, very controversial phrase. Actually a lot of the phrases used in the criminal justice system tend to be sort of pejorative. Is that the right word?
Exactly.
You know, phrases like offender are not welcoming. They're not inviting. They're not phrases that we agree with. But I think it's very important for the population that we serve to know that although we don't agree with the use of these phrases are going to be used throughout the course of this initiative. So just getting them used to it, and sad but true.
And not just getting them used to it, but making sure that they understand that that label is not who you see. That's not the only thing you see. That just happens to be there. And we want to make sure that they can, in some ways, embrace and distance themselves from that label.
Yes. Yep. All right. So, the criminal legal system in every state has been around for quite some time. Very complex systems, very antiquated systems, very real systems. I think that different systems change at a different pace, at different paces. I mean, you know, lately with a lot of the, like with case management in the 20 plus years that I've been doing it, I've seen incredible change. And some of it has been very fast, especially in terms of embracing concepts like harm reduction and trauma-informed care. Other systems, like the legal system, their change happens at an almost glacial pace. I mean, the only change that I can really see that's been really significant is the ability to get records digitally very quickly, and that's more of an IT thing than sort of a true change within that system. The legal system, it's just kind of like things are just kind of set in stone. But I think that if there's one theme throughout here, this entire presentation, it's about taking a holistic approach to serving our patients. And as Sylvia said a minute ago, you know, people are not just one thing, and a label that's applied to someone is not their identity. I think the danger in working within these systems is that sometimes the client themselves buy into it. So they'll be labeled something and then they will actually accept that label. So Sylvia's point about both accepting something and also sort of critically questioning it and getting buy-in from the client is a very good one, Sylvia. Our clients come from a variety of communities and have a variety of identities. For the purposes of this initiative, you know, the real goal is just it's employment and housing. And so these labels may be relevant in that context, but certainly not in a broader context. And we just really want to reinforce that with our patients whenever possible. Any thoughts on that, Sylvia?
Not on that, because you've covered it.
Okay. All right, so continuing. Laws change over time. Laws differ regionally. They differ from state to state. There's many different ways to sort of run afoul of the law. So it's really silly to look at some charge from 25 years ago about marijuana possession and just see how incredibly cruel it is when that same crime, quote unquote, might be handled very differently by today's standards. Also, you know, crimes, like everything else, exist in a context, and they exist in the context of the individual's life circumstances, and most crimes, correct me if I'm wrong, Sylvia, are a byproduct of some sort of trauma, unmet need, or addiction. There was a fourth bullet point that I didn't add here, which is, you know, sort of, we were saying trauma, and I'm thinking emotional trauma, but also physical trauma. The incidence of head trauma in our population is unusually high. So there's a lot of different stuff sort of driving the circumstances that lead to someone having criminal issues. The way that we can understand those issues best is by really understanding the client that we're serving and really building as close a relationship as possible, and really getting to know them and also letting them get to know us as well. The thing about relationship building is it's not a one-way street. So although I might not, I definitely would not give a client my personal information. I divulge general information all of the time on a regular basis because it's relevant in most cases.
And as we're, excuse me, as we're walking back with a person and taking a look at how they have, you know, had a criminal background and under what circumstances that happened, we might also be looking at how it was, and you've heard this before, all of you, as I'm preaching to the choir, which is the crimes that they committed might have very much been solutions to a much larger emotional crisis going on within. So if it was, you know, smoking marijuana and getting arrested for it, well, that smoking marijuana might have been a solution at that point. They might have otherwise committed suicide had they not been able to tamp down some of that unbearable emotional pain that people have experienced through trauma. So that might be even a chance to tease out, as a little bit counterintuitive as it sounds, some strengths-based behavior that was, you survived, and that was behavior you were involved in to survive. So everything is an opportunity to be building a person's self-esteem. I'm not saying reinforcing the fact that they committed crimes, but reinforcing the fact that they're here today.
Yeah.
James, anything else here, James?
Well, I was going to say, you said the line before I did, but the line you can never go wrong with is, you're here today, right now in front of me, so you must be doing something right. I think strengths perspective is absolutely the way. And you're right, when people are sort of in the wilds and sort of forging their own path, I mean, when they're not engaged in care, I mean, yeah, that's like self-medicating or just coping strategies. Yeah, it's what seemed appropriate at the time. So yeah, I agree. Okay, so disclosure, and by disclosure, really, it can mean so many different things. But in this case, it's about getting disclosure on what's on the criminal record. Really having the individual talk to you in their own words about what was going on. Having the individual talk to you in their own words about who they are and how they self-identify and what their goals are. And then also, because of these systems that involve potential housing and employment, how you disclose that information to outside parties. So it's all these sort of different conversations that are a process taking place over a period of time. But the first step in that is really getting to a place where the client that you're working with feels comfortable talking to you and being comfortable with you and being around you. And that requires a certain amount of sensitivity on our part, and is definitely a process. The first step obviously is to create an environment where people feel comfortable, where people are, obviously you don't want someone in a public space disclosing sensitive information. So even just the physical setup of a room with a door on it that's quiet and peaceful so that you can get to that place over time is really, really important. But also, with the relationship building, as I was reviewing the slides, what I realized is, even if, for example, even if you have a hard time getting a hold of someone by phone, the fact that you try and that you're willing to leave voicemail messages, it's the effort over time that really speaks for itself. So in relationship building, and in order to create a space where people can disclose, you really need to be consistent, or we need to be consistent in our behaviors, and our efforts to stay in touch with the person and hear them and understand what they're saying and ask questions that tease out important facts. I think sort of a flurry of calls and then not trying to contact them for a month, it sends a really confusing message. So I think, in terms of our behavior, we really have to be consistent. And then being consistent in creating a space where that allows them to become our ally is also important. With goals, I mean, goals should always be re-examined. I think it's really tough for someone to, the thing I've noticed, I've been going to court with clients a lot more lately. The thing I've noticed is that, cases just get dragged on and on. They can go on for months or years. I think for a person to have to walk into court and have stuff said about them or have to self-disclose, stuff about their past, I think that can be really triggering. And also with us, in terms of us examining or re-examining goals with clients, I think that can also be really triggering as well. But I think it's really important to always re-examine and really redefine goals and make sure that we're speaking the same language as the client, and that we really have an understanding. I mean, theoretically, with this process, by talking and building relationships with the clients that we serve, like theoretically, their perception of themselves and their past should shift. And because of that, our examination of the goals should also shift. I mean, everything should be shifting. This should be, they talk about a continuum. I mean, this is a continuum where you really want to find out whether the goal that you discussed 6 months ago, whether it actually means the same thing now. It may, but it may not. I mean, by supporting the patient, you're helping them have some insight that they may, you're helping them gain insight. that they may not have had a year ago or 6 months ago or a month ago. So just checking in regularly. It feels weird to sort of go over stuff again and again, but I find that if at the beginning of the relationship you let people know, like, if you let clients know, I take this seriously and I want to make sure that we're not heading in a direction that is not meaningful to you any longer. So I'm going to ask you about goals on a regular basis, and I hope this is okay with you. Let's do this together. But if me re-examining goals with you becomes annoying, you tell me and it's fine, and I will back off. But I think if it's done for the right purposes and with the right intent, it can't be wrong. It's all out of concern and care for the clients that we serve. And also learning a little bit about the client's style and how I think in a lot of conversations that we have with clients, there's so much subtext. There's so much there's so much intuition and sort of feeling involved. That I think when you know a client well, you'll know their style, and you'll be able to sort of ask probing questions based on nonverbal cues and sort of how someone states something. And also, I think knowing, as much as possible, knowing yourself. I think checking in with yourself around implicit bias. And I think this came up when we were writing the notes. I think the genesis of this was that a lot of charges that are sort of thrown, a lot of charges and a lot of labels that are thrown at our clients are really heavy words, like, you know, phrases, sex offender and larceny and bank robbery. And I think as humans, I think we have a tendency to sort of rush to judgment in some cases. I mean, it's hard not to hear a phrase like sex offender and not rush to some sort of judgment. But if you've done this work for a minute or two, everything is about gradation and context, and so finding out from the individual what was going on, but also finding out sort of what our biases are, or sort of checking our perception of things can be really, really helpful. Does that make any sense, Sylvia?
Yes, and James, our face, and everybody else, our face can be what they're looking for to reinforce maybe some lack of self-love. So as opposed to our, knowing what your reaction might be to a label that someone has or something in their background, and understanding your biases, you can check your face too. Because as long as we can be giving them reinforcement and finding some way that we can find something to reflect a strength back, again here, like that was then, this is now. Or, yes, I've heard that before. So, I've been through this before with someone. So that may be something that makes it not quite as heavy for them. So they can just kind of fit it differently to them. But again, taking the time to look at what your stuff is really important. And, as many times as I've heard certain things, I still have something hits me in the pit of my stomach. And hopefully it doesn't show on my face, but it makes me ask different questions. And I'm just thinking in terms like that, just kind of know yourself. And again, we're preaching to the choir. You do this. Can we move to the next, James? You okay?
I want to make 2 points.
Sure.
One, I think it's important for clients to hear. We've housed sex offenders. It can be done. If you've done something once, it can be replicated. And I think saying that to the person, but also in terms of implicit bias, there might be. I can't speak for anyone on the line, but there may be people who feel that people who have done certain things shouldn't be housed. And I'm not in a place to agree or disagree with that, but if you feel that way and it informs the work you're doing, it's definitely something to be discussed with a supervisor or someone where you can sort of have a discussion around it. Because, I'm assuming we're all on the same page, but maybe not. I don't know.
Well, James, I just want to add one thing. This by no means says that no matter what is in that person's criminal history is a go. That's not factual. There are instances where it's an opportunity perhaps to encourage the person to do some self-work.
Yes.
For me, and with the way I guide the staff here, since we do an enormous amount of housing, I always look to screen people into services, not to screen them out. However, once in a while, there will be a person who has a persistent pattern of violent behavior that has not been addressed, and it is present now. That may not be a time that we can work on housing, but maybe we should be working on something else as we're working on housing. But it's an opportunity to say, anybody who is looking at this background, and we're going to look at it, is going to have a reaction.
Yeah.
And there are safety issues, true safety issues when you're working. So I just want to make sure it's not heard that we're saying there's no factors that you don't consider a different action around.
Right.
Or the way you serve a person will always serve in twos. You need to know those things. It's because your safety, community safety, and the person's safety are equally important.
I agree, and I've said to clients on many occasions, they're going to see a pattern here, and they might ask you, well, what's going to be different this time? And that's a fair question, and sort of work with them on how they might answer that, or at least get them thinking about how it might be different this time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I agree.
Can we move on?
Yes. I think at this rate, we're going to be done in like 19 minutes. So we're zipping through this, but it's good stuff. So know the facts. People with extensive criminal histories, quote unquote, may not remember all the details, especially if some of it was in the context of things like active substance use, or people have had. It's a lot to remember. So I think initially asking someone about sort of what's in their background, there may be things that fall to the wayside that will pop up on the rap sheet. I think our clients deal with a lot on a day-to-day basis. So I'm always of the mind to give the client the benefit of the doubt in every circumstance. I think the understanding is that we're going to work with them, and with a criminal history when it's printed out, I mean it's if there's anyone they should trust, it's us, because we're sort of their advocate. We're working with them. I just think it's a lot to remember, and a lot of the clients I work with, their criminal history is sort of minimal. It's sort of a little bit here, a little bit there. Every once in a while, you run into someone with like a lot going on, and that's harder to sort of wade through. And sometimes I even call in my team for help on sort of understanding certain things in the criminal record, but it's a lot. And what I thought you were going to say earlier, I wrote here, nothing is better than the facts, but please remember these facts exist in a context, and that context is important too. I've had cases where actually the charges did not seem plausible to me. I was more inclined to sort of believe, because there's a number of ways to have mistakes show up in the criminal record. People with similar names, people that are juniors or seniors, et cetera, et cetera. I think sometimes, patients say, well, tell me, like, this absolutely is not what it says here, and I do believe them. And also asking for a criminal record can take a little bit of time. It's really, really worth it, because when it's in print, it's kind of like a credit report. I mean, you're looking at sort of where a person's been and a history of activity, and you can examine it and really sort of examine it from a critical perspective. I think sometimes clients are really, really nervous about having us see these documents, but anything we can do to help them feel at ease and make them understand that it's in their best interest, not only for us to look at it, but for us to review it together, for them to give us their input, for us to connect them with legal resources in case there's anything that needs to be changed or modified or disputed. And I think that's really, really important.
And as we go further, you're going to see that in some states where some of you are working, it is harder, much harder to get records. And we do, it's really important to have it in front of you so that person knows what is being said. And our folks have been transient, so mail hasn't been an effective way to send them information about court. They have sometimes some little charge becomes 5 pages because of failure to appear.
Yeah.
And it just, these kinds of things, you just have to tease through it and find out what it is and what's going on. Let's go on.
And I was also going to say that, a rap sheet might be 50 pages, but only a few things might actually be relevant to what we're working on. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, a few minutes ago where, what I'm usually looking for are patterns of behavior, any sort of arson charges, any sort of sex offender charges. A lot of the stuff like shoplifting, it just seems like not really meaningful. I mean, it doesn't seem, in a lot of cases, not relevant to what we're trying to accomplish. I'm looking for sort of bigger stuff. I'm trying to anticipate what the landlords or employers might have objection to or be concerned about.
That's why it's really important not only to get this record, sometimes you have to go deeper and get the police report to see what actually happened. I had a woman in front of me once who had nothing at all on her record except one charge, and it was arson. And she was in her 40s, so she had plenty of time to get in trouble. There were no, disorderly conducts, no breaches of peace, no criminal mischief, nothing, an arson charge. Digging deeper, it turned out that there was a fire at her home, and there were children in the home, and the fire was started by the Christmas tree, and there was some negligence around that fire, but because there were children in the house, it was arson. And because she didn't do something right when she did it, and she took responsibility for it, but there were children in the house, but you read arson, that's a biggie. And
yeah.
That makes people very, very, especially a landlord. I don't know if I want to rent out a place to someone who lights fires. Those are big. But on getting the background, I just, there's one thing, if you have any source of funds to pay a firm to get the record for you, that is the easiest way on earth. However, it is expensive, particularly since we rarely have that kind of money. I believe somehow with this grant, if it's kind of trying to remove some barriers around employment or housing, if there was a way to have put some non-salary money or program supplies money, you might have been able to do that if you saw it as extremely important. But typically, we don't have money like this. Our organization, because we do rent out, we have 33 units that are ours, and then another program. We do put that as the cost of operations for those housing that we do the deep background checks. But then when you're doing that type of a thing where you're hiring a firm, you've got to, again, peel away some information from people, like where you've lived, what names you've used, what cities have you been in, because it's just not going to be a matter of, oh, here I'm in Boston, let's just look in Massachusetts. No, it's really a little bit more, and that is teasing out information again. What aliases did they have? So if you were to use a firm, there are firms. Some are better. Bigger organizations do it for hiring employees. They do background checks, particularly organizations that hire staff to work with children. They absolutely get very, very, very comprehensive background checks. So if you need to know a firm in your area, that might be one way to do. In some states, you can get your records online pretty easily. I'd say those of us in my state, very simple. I can find out Connecticut background just by going to one site, putting the person's name in, writing in the approximate range that they were, their birth year, and typically that'll come up. Something will come up and it'll show me open cases, and it will show me, convictions and that stuff. And if a person's record, if a charge was nullied, it will not show up. So that's an important thing to know. But each state is a little bit different. Some go at the county level, some go at the state level. And I think that where you are, the level of legwork you have to do. However, you can get information. In some instances, there may be a fee, and depending upon the state and the rules of the state, that fee may be able to be waived. It's always worth asking. I have seen rarely a fee associated with it. With a state level, I've only seen one printed in one state, but there may be others that I couldn't get deep enough in. And just know, employers and landlords, they do, if they conduct a background check, they do it differently. Some might rely on what they can get free online, and some might be paying someone. So just know that, and see, as you get to know landlords, you'll probably know what they're doing. James, anything more on this?
No.
Nope. And the person has to request, in some instances, the person you're working with has to request the background information themselves in some instances. And I know that I just used poor grammar by saying themselves, but I'm being sensitive to pronouns. My old inclination would be him or herself, but my inclination now is say themselves to make sure that we're inclusive with pronouns. So if you hear bad grammar, let go. And here we go. That's one of my things.
If there's one point you take away from this webinar,
Let go.
let go. Pronouns,
Let go.
pronouns matter, and let go.
Yeah. Okay, so that's more on that. We'll see more. What is the criminal record? What's in it? James, you want to talk about it? You want me to?
I would love to. I'm assuming most people on the call have seen a rap sheet. It's just a listing of all charges, sentences, probation, parole status. I mean, it takes a minute. Like, I actually had to sort of, the first time, I had to sit down and do some research, because they can use some pretty incredible abbreviations and/or unfamiliar terminology. But basically, as I said earlier, it's analogous to like a credit report. It shows where you've been and what you've done. It's relevant only because it's a potential barrier to housing and or employment. And as I said, some people have none, some people have many, many, many pages of stuff in their criminal record. Again, because things are sort of digital now, it really does follow you. And we have patients who are starting to work with on housing and employment, where we're having some success and we haven't in the past. I mean, but it's the same thing coming up every time. Like every time you go for like a job or housing, this stuff seems to rear its ugly head. I think that the big factor is, you know, the amount since the last incident and now. So, you know, if you're going to go for something like public housing through the housing authority, I mean, it's going to come up. There's always a mitigation process. So regardless, I just think, you know, people want to know how things have changed, in what way they've changed, and why things are different now. And I think in most cases, we're having more success because, you know, working with people over a period of time, we're able to not only, you know, connect to them with services that can help offer support, and help them sort of move ahead. But then by doing that, we can document it and use it during the mitigation process. So, you know, we're always looking for themes. Sylvia, help me here, because in some cases, like with that woman who had one charge, it's this total unexpected thing where it's a complete barrier. And in other cases, you know, people have many, many different charges and they seem to get into housing fairly easily. I don't think there's any like algorithm or rhyme or reason to it. It's just sort of really a case of the individual and their circumstances and what their goals are and how those sort of fit together. It's
also with that woman not taking her word for it, that that's what it was, is the reason why you would drill down to go get the police report at the local police department, where it will write a narrative of what they discovered and what happened. So for her, if I were to get that and have it, and we're going to present her for housing and it says arson with her permission, I would share what that was, especially if it would mitigate it. If I learned that she actually locked the door and lit a fire with gasoline at the bedroom door where somebody was sleeping, I mean, obviously I would not be advocating the same way for housing. So that's why it's important to get that, because we have found when we as a partnership, the person we serve and me or our staff and the landlord or the employer, when you go take it that next step and share what's going on, people are, you know, we work with humans and all of us are human, and people sometimes say, got it, I got it.
Right.
And so I think that that's an important thing. That's how we do mitigate it, and that's why we want to get deeper into it. In certain instances, it does take some time. And there is one record that picks up everything, and it's free, but it takes time. It's actually not 100% free because sometimes you have to pay for fingerprints, but it is called the III, and that's with the FBI. And that is, I got to always look up what it stands for, I'm sorry. But the III is, I think, let me go backwards for 1 second. Sorry, guys. This is the biggie. This is the biggie. It's the Interstate Identification Index. It's a national fingerprint file. So that's like, you know, you go get your prints done, you fill out a form, you submit it, and 3 to 4 months later, that report's going to come. So that will have everything on it. So if that's something that you have an interest in getting, if you don't pay for it, that will take 3 to 4 months. There are ways to move it faster with a firm in between, but we're not, you know, of that, you know, capability necessarily to do that. But I just also want, pardon me?
Okay. I was going to say, you need the client's permission to request that, right?
No, the client will do it him or herself because they have to, because they have to get their fingerprints and fill out a form and submit it. The client has to request it. You can only request your own.
How do you pitch
Law
that
enforcement can get it. What's that?
How do you pitch that to a client? Like, hey, let's contact the FBI.
I would tell them what it is. Knowledge is power. Always knowledge is power. And you know what? They may not want to do anything like that. But as we're looking things up, this is one way we can find that out. Again, there's a big time gap there, which may not be working for any of us. So it's just something to know. It's an option. It's a way to find out things.
Yeah.
That's the one that you're not hitting every. If I lived in California and I lived in Massachusetts and then I lived in Louisiana and now I'm in Connecticut, that's a lot of, you know, different searches.
And you said it's free or there's a fee attached? The
fee is probably the fingerprints. There's no fee other than that from what I can ascertain. It's just the fingerprint fee. Local police departments sometimes charge you for the fingerprints like $5 or $10.
Oh, that's
yeah,
great.
You can walk into any local one, and then there's a form to fill out, and that's available online.
All right, see, I learned something new here today.
You just learned the III. And it is actually referred to as the III, Interstate Identification Index. Anything more on this slide?
I was going to say, I feel as though our job boils down to the same thing, which is saying to potential employers or housing partners, I know what you're going to say. This is not what it appears to be. Let me explain. You know, like when you were talking about, you know, with the woman's permission, you would disclose the, you know, sort of the context of that arson thing. I mean, it's what we do all day long, which is like this. I know this might not look great on paper. This is not who the person is. Let's talk about that.
And I would, with her permission, have done that before we ever met the landlord because I would not want her to have to deal with that.
Yeah.
You know, just find out a system that we would say, you know, I'm going to make the first calls if it's all right with you. And then she would only know about, you know, the places that we got through right now. Until she's where she needs to be, you know, where she's feeling stronger about how she presents herself.
Yeah.
Ready to roll on the next one?
Ready to roll.
Okay. Do records expire? No, they don't. However, You know that there is a process in every state, and they are possibly different, which is going to the Board of Pardons and getting an expungement or a record to be cleaned up, or, you know, a pardon actually. But that is quite a, that's quite a process. And if any of you have looked that up, it's probably worth getting information on how to pursue a pardon or an expungement of a record in your state. In Connecticut, I've spent a bit of time to get trained on how to apply for them with the people that we serve, or also who to find that does it well. And the application for a pardon is actually like a good map for putting your life back together. It's really securing references, having your neighbors get to know who you are, learning to disclose in different instances so that people say, yes, I do know about the record, and he's a good neighbor. He did disclose that, and he always mows my lawn, or she always mows my lawn, or they do. So it's worth looking that up, and it is really becoming connected again. And if a person is motivated to go for a record expungement, they will find that their life, they're putting pieces back into their life that probably are things that will make their life of a higher quality. It is a very interesting plan, and I look at it very much like a service plan and setting your goals there. It's getting stable, living somewhere stably, bringing in income, getting income, you know, legally, owning what you did. Not saying anymore, well, he said I did it, but I didn't. It was really him. The more you do that, even if it's not true, just this is one of those let goes, as awful as it seems. If you were convicted of it, it's on your record, and the Board of Pardons looks at it like you did it. So I made really bad decisions, is what you say. At a different time in my life, I made bad decisions, and I'm putting good decisions in my life now. So there's ways to sneakily get around owning it. You know, all charges created equal. And I think you all know this, because if you've been doing housing work or employment work, we're always looking at what are the patterns of behavior and the particular types of charges. I said to you earlier, a pattern of recent, ongoing, unaddressed violent behavior or violent crimes look like something else needs to be dealt with now, other than employment, other than housing, because that person is not, they have something else going on that could be, you know, harmful for them and possibly get them back into some kind of a sentence in jail. So we want to address what that is. Mostly, though, we see older charges or little, you know, petty larceny type things. We see stuff like that. And your accompanying document always, when you're looking at a rap sheet or a record, is to have that paper document in front of you, and then you're going to look up the charges as they come up, in what state they were, you know, they were charged against the person, to find out what that means. Because a third degree of this or a first degree of that is very, very different, and you need to know what it is. It also speaks to if there's a pattern of third degree sexual assaults. And in Connecticut, what that means is that the act might have taken against a person who could not fend for themselves, a vulnerable population, like someone who is possibly sleeping, or a person with a disability, or a person in a coma, or something like that. And that speaks to a different thing. That's a different behavior. And you want to know what it means. So look them all up and get yourself educated. So again, we ask you always, and we ask ourselves, to check our own reactions and to check what we think. Again, sex offender makes us think a lot. However, because it is such a charged word and people do jump to the worst, I think many times people hear sex offender and hear pedophile, or they hear violent rapist, and there's so much in between those. So you can always look up a sex offender registry in every state, because you should be able to see who's living in your neighborhood, so it's open to the community. This is just, you know, I don't know if it was Megan's Law, I don't know which one of them it was, but you know who's got any kind of a sex offense in their background, so you can get that at your computer sitting at your desk pretty typically. And again, go look up what the charge means. In most instances, if it's a one-off type of a charge and it happened a long time ago and the person has been out, you're not looking at a pattern of risky behavior. You're looking, at something that happened. And again, it's in context. What James said at the beginning, they happen in context. So this is one of those instances where, again, you might go get the police report and see if it backs up some of the story that you've heard. James, anything else on understanding the record here? Do you think?
I was going to say, before I started working in this field, my understanding, my concept of what a sex offender was very, very different. And 9 times out of 10, for our population, it just means public urination. I mean, I've worked for years in this field, and I've only worked with like 1 or 2 genuine sex offenders. The rest were peeing in public.
Yeah. Yep.
And some of the success that we've had with, reducing levels or expungement have usually been around things like that. I mean, it can be done because, you're right, it is a lot of work to have anything in the record changed or altered or pardoned, but it can be done, and it is a process.
It's a process that you should be prepared will be a long-term process. However, you want to take the gifts that it gives you as you go along. Some things are worth the effort that will make your life better, regardless of how the end game works out.
Exactly.
And this is where we're talking about the end game again.
Yep.
So, James, I hand this to you.
All right. So a lot of the work that we're doing, because we are their allies, we are their partners in this struggle, is to really highlight their progress, recognize their successes, and the way that I explained to them is, we're rebranding you. Your potential housing or employment partner has this impression of you, but that's not who you are. We want to show them that you are someone different today, someone better, and that you've been working really, really hard to get to where you are today. And I think the secondary gain is that sometimes through this work, through this rebranding process, our patients actually come to understand that they really are someone different from who they used to be, in many, many better ways. So a lot of it is, we explain to them, we can't change the past, we can definitely change the present and the future, and it's not a passive thing. We really need to sort of lean into it, collect letters of support and help, even in just talking to people about their networks and their supports, it's really, really beneficial for people because you see people realize they do have supports, and it's not just, they have many, many different go-tos, and there is a safety net there. So a lot of it for me involves really reflecting back to the person I'm working with, their strengths and what I see and their efforts. So that every time I meet with someone, I'm just constantly sort of mirroring back their hard work. I suspect you do the same thing, Sylvia.
Well, that and how might we have done this differently if the hard work isn't evident today? Not being one who would lie to someone or give reinforcement for something that I can't find. I might give reinforcement for looking at what you discovered about yourself today. I wasn't prepared. Oh, great. Self-knowledge, good. But again, we're looking at people being able to reclaim some roles or claim them for the first time. Looking at people's histories, their histories may not have, as you all know, started out on any foot that was grounded. That that person may have never had an experience of a Sunday dinner with a family around, or somebody who's making sure they're up in the morning and clean and clothes and ready for the day, or, a house that was somewhat, safe. So we want them to claim roles of a person who takes their safety, their own safety first, and has some self-love. Again, I look at that a lot, and person having some self-love and doing the things that you need to do to take care of yourself. And in the past, they may never have learned that at all. And we are looking at the roles that they have now, which is a person who does own themselves and present themselves in a different way.
Exactly. And this isn't about trauma. This is about traumas with a couple S's or Z's at the end. I mean, you're not going to get someone. I find it hard to believe that most people that are in a shelter that I work with, I mean, they just have an extensive history of trauma. And I think sort of at the bottom line, you know, our goal is to remind patients or clients, you're not a bad person. I mean, that our clients come and meet with us despite all of the dysfunction and chaos and history of trauma. I mean, that is a real strength. So the more you can find out about what people have been through, just the better it is. Better, the more effective it will be at, you'll be at helping to rebrand them. But you know, while you're talking, Sylvia, I'm just thinking, like, where is the line between, like, with your client who has a history of, you know, sort of violence, and it's kind of not under control. Like it's really important that we not set people up for failure. And I think you addressed that in your last comments, like sort of discussing it with the person you're working with so that you don't set them up for failure, and really finding out what their goals are and whether those goals are realistic, and even with, you know, with regards to some of the things that might be on the rap sheet, whether what they want is realistic in light of that. So it is a very sort of personal, individualized discussion. The one thing I would hate to do would be to sort of get someone into housing that was not right for them, have them fail, and then, you know, they have an eviction or some sort of bad, you know, they have additional trauma and you've contributed to it. So knowing where that line is always very, very tricky, and that's sort of like the art of effective case management.
I'm going to move on to the next one.
Moving on.
Yeah, we're always looking for, you know, to coach people. We're always going to try to coach people with disclosure because of, and I'm going to have James talk a little more about this because he's so sensitive, and I'm really not. But it, you know, the trauma, the shame, and the triggers that come with it. So James.
Well, I mean, you know, people are complex, and I think their lives become more complex with the passage of time because, you know, just stuff builds up. So a lot of issues from a lot of different spheres in someone's life that can totally be intertwined and under-examined. I think the art of effective case management is to sort of, if you're going to untangle a bunch of strands that are sort of bunched together, is sort of knowing which strand to choose first, or how to get the patient to identify that strand. Because you know, the bottom line is, you won't be able to do everything all at once. I mean, everything, like good case management is about sort of sequencing. Like if the goal is employment, and there are barriers, there are multiple barriers to employment, you know, the art of case management is untangling those strands in order so that you get the desired effect, which would be employment. But that involves so much discussion and sort of identifying all the different strands, and that can be hard when your client is in survival mode and just trying to get by on a day-to-day basis. So you know, there's a sense in here about helping our clients examine things from many different angles, and some days you can really, really get that done. Things are just, and other times, you know, it's just not the time or place to do that. But I think, you know, things like playing devil's advocate or sort of asking a client to examine something from a different perspective can be really, really effective. And I think, you know, this second point about perspective is really about transparency. You know, I think you've made several points throughout this presentation, Sylvia, about letting people know ahead of time what to expect. And I think in terms of perspective, I think it's fine to say to a client, like, you know, landlords want quiet tenants who pay rent on time. So they have this very particular perspective, and that's what they're looking for. So they may ask you the following question: how would we counter it? Or what can we do to build a case before it even becomes a question, so that we can rest their mind at ease that you're going to be the best tenant in the world? And having those discussions ahead of time so that the client feels supportive and they're not sort of blindsided. Like the worst thing is to get into a meeting with an employer or a potential housing partner and something comes up that is unscripted and totally out of the blue, and it just totally sends things sort of into left field, into an unexpected direction. So I think with perspective, just, our clients are used, because they're in survival mode, they're used to using like one perspective, their perspective, but everyone has has their own perspective, and it may be a different perspective, and a lot of people have agendas, they may be different agendas. So really putting that out there and discussing it is a good idea. And I think when meeting with someone for the first time, like, or even a 15th time, like, tell me about yourself. Like what's important for me to know about you? And that way they can sort of set the agenda, let them, people let you know what they want you to know. Just because you're their case manager doesn't mean that you have carte blanche to know everything about them. There are, it's nice to know different things about clients, but we may only get one thing. As long as it sort of serves the purpose at hand, then it's good. But letting clients disclose to you what they need to know, what we need to know, it's important.
And you're always building an authentic relationship with the person you serve. That is, kind of a sign of a successful relationship, that they tell you the truth, and they will start doing that as they feel safer, that you're not going to throw them away, because they have been judged and hanged in the past for telling the truth by other people. So we don't want to throw them away. Want them to know we're here, we heard it, and this is what it means.
Yeah, and sometimes there are little case management tricks that you can use, and I mean they're not tricks, but I mean I will sometimes, if I'm meeting with a client, if I'm having a hard time focusing, and I say to a client, I just want to apologize in advance. Have you ever had one of those days where you're having a hard time focusing? If you put that out there, sometimes clients will share a little bit about them and their experiences, and it also excuses your behavior if you're not completely focused on that particular day, but letting them know that you have a lot of the same struggles that they do, or even recognizing that contents of their criminal record, I've said to clients, the first time I read it, it was really, really interesting, and parts of it were overwhelming. Like, what are your reactions when you look through this and comparing notes? Because I think whenever you're reviewing a criminal record, it's just a lot coming at you all at once, and it might be 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years compressed into 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 pages, and that is a lot. And I think it's just important to validate it and recognize it and put it out there. Mm-hmm. There's a million different ways to accommodate our clients. Sometimes it's in bite-sized pieces. Sometimes it's all at once. So really just asking them, finding out, it's important.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go to the next slide.
Next slide. Coaching. All right. So after you find out what, tell me about yourself, or what's relevant, or what do I need to know about you? I think it's a logical question to ask. Do you have any so we're gonna be working on housing or employment. This is gonna be a factor. Pardon me for asking, but do you have any sort of criminal record? And then do you know what's on it? Can we look at a copy together? Is that okay? If the person says no, not right now, ask, would it be okay for me to check in about that in maybe another month or so? Today's no, maybe tomorrow's yes, or next week's yes. So always keep asking. Again, a huge, voluminous document with a lot of stuff on it in some cases. And that thing about transparency and just saying, so in preparing, helping to prepare this presentation, one thing that came up was about releases and transparency and letting people know what the purpose is. I mean, I say to clients all the time, we want this document, and it's for the sole purposes of employment and or housing. In most cases, for me, it's housing. We need to look at this as important. It's relevant to the housing goal that you have. So is that okay? But also, even with any sort of document or anything like a release, I explain to them about the release and that it is only for the purposes of care coordination or for housing. Like, I think sometimes people worry, sorry, I'm traveling back in time to when we were discussing contacting the FBI. That alone could just be a really heavy concept for someone to get their mind around. But I think if you say to them, this is for a very specific purpose and a very specific application, it does not mean the FBI are going to swoop down on you in a helicopter in the middle of the night, but explain to them what the reason is. With the releases, I just say to clients all the time, I say, a release doesn't allow me to talk to this other entity about anything that I choose to related to you. I can only discuss case management or housing with them, and only as it pertains to the goal that you and I have set. So your business about what you had for lunch or what shoes you were wearing, that's not relevant to the discussion. It will not be discussed. I think a lot of what we're trying to do is, in addition to reassuring our clients that they are not bad people, is around protecting their information and protecting their privacy. And I think it's something that rarely gets discussed in this context, but it's a huge part of it. I mean, I think if you're just building a relationship with someone, I think they would have every right to be suspicious about what you're going to do with a release or with information about them. So transparency is the goal, and just not just making sure that you're not unintentionally traumatizing or triggering someone, because as this last point says, there's so much stigma around. There's so much stigma around everything: being in a shelter, being homeless, accessing behavioral health services, engaging in care. I mean, just, it is a very scary process. And earlier we were talking about different perspectives and agendas. I mean, consider the client's perspective. I mean, this is actually absolutely would be reason for concern on their part. But anything that we can do to, if we have a client who really wants housing and they're really into it, and we can connect them with behavioral health and support groups and a community that they didn't previously have, and then we can document that, the immediate gain would be housing. The secondary gain is they have more support than they did before this process started. So sometimes there's gains that are beyond what we initially imagine. I mean, it's great to see someone who really wants it to sort of take off. It's great to see someone get into housing and really just blossom and have a lot of their goals come true. And
sometimes, James, sometimes it doesn't work no matter what you do, no matter how good you are at all this, and sometimes a person can't get over their trauma to engage.
That's true. Yes. I appreciate the reality check. I'm saving my pessimism for the end of the week. Monday's when it's the only day of the week I'm optimistic because it's a new week. But you're right. Sometimes people don't, and that's why we can't set people up for failure. But you're right. Sometimes it doesn't work, but it's, I mean, the client's taking a gamble and we're taking a gamble as well. And you're right. We don't want to put it in a place that would cause harm. We don't want to do no harm is the motto.
Yeah, I think about one person that I was working with, a woman who was sleeping in her car, and she's in her 60s, and just could not sign a piece of paper to give me a release.
Yeah.
Could not. I had housing for her and everything. I worked on it for almost 2 years.
Yeah.
And it happened. Yeah. And then I tried to take it away by saying I was going to turn myself into the elder abuse authorities, because my letting her be in the car means I'm committing elder abuse. And that didn't help either.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, but it sounds like you've done a lot. Like I think the thing that I'm always thinking as a case manager is, like, what is it? How do we define a success? Like, what is a success? Yeah. I mean, elder abuse aside, I mean, you allowed this woman, you explained your case, you offered her an option, and she declined it. I don't know if that's a failure. I mean, it wasn't the outcome that you wanted, and she might have been, sounds like she definitely would have been better off in housing, but.
Yeah. Couldn't make it through that. She couldn't push through the hoop.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's take a look at, you ready with the, yeah, go ahead.
Can I just put in a plug for partial successes? I mean, even if someone says, I will meet with a behavioral health specialist for a month, and if I don't like it at the end of that month, I will not go anymore, and they go and they decide this really isn't for me, that's a success in my opinion, so partial success. So even if they tried something, if they took a chance they wouldn't normally take, I think that's a success.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. It's just kind of important that, you know, people hear and see things differently, and we've got to remember that the person that you're serving may be seeing or having a relationship with their background that is different from what you see or what a landlord sees. And we want to talk about how things are seen very differently, and sometimes we see things worse. I'm thinking about a person who applied for a job with me. He wrote on his job application that he had a felony and that he wanted to discuss it because I would discover it. And given that he had all the credentials that I was looking for, I thought, okay, I'll interview him. Got into it, said, terrible time in my life. I was drinking, I was driving, and I drove the car into a house. So I have this felony DUI, or whatever it was called at the time. And he just owned it. And he said, I learned everything from that, and I lost a lot. And I had to put my life together. And I hired him and never, ever regretted it. So I was not a person who was looking at it in some negative way. I was interested in finding out more. And I think that he had experienced a way to get, you know, hopefully if somebody would talk to him about it. And sometimes we found landlords saying, yes, that happened to a brother or sister of mine. I understand. And I believe in giving people a chance or a second chance. So we're sometimes all set up. So we just want to know that people see things differently, and that we want to have the people we serve who see things not so positively recognize what they do well and what they have learned and any changes they might have made. And then also, if they haven't learned much about something, that we kind of nudge them at little smaller steps, because we still need to be pushing them forward to for them to get a better understanding of, you know, not only their strengths and abilities, but the things that they can strengthen and learn. James, is there something? Yeah.
I was going to say, in case people can't tell, this is a picture of either two pillars or a profile of Bernadette Peters ×4. So this is about perspective, and it's all how we look at it. I don't know if people can see that. Took me a minute.
I thought it was Khaleesi.
Yes, perhaps.
Yeah. Anyway, anything more on this slide, James?
No, no.
Yeah.
You're right.
There we go.
Me?
Talked about whatever, anybody.
No, you.
Okay. This is James's simple analogy. Thank you for giving it to me, James. We're basically creating a map, and we're showing the person how we are making sure that we also look at where they came from and how much they put into getting here, and we're contextualizing it in a positive way as best we can, and pulling from that how they got here, pulling the skills they had to get here that worked, to start paving the road to get where they want to go, housing, a job, whatever. And there's no closed parentheses on that, by the way. I got to fix it. And then we're looking at, you know, sometimes they didn't stay on the easier road or the shorter distance, and they detoured. But what did they get out of that? What did they learn out of it? Even if it was a negative thing, even if they discovered more potholes, and maybe, you know, we're on a journey, and sometimes you have to change a tire, and sometimes you have to stop and rest, and things are not a straight line. But we're learning from each one of those detours. We are learning from how we got here today, and we're learning how to get there tomorrow from what we did in the past. And we're on a journey together. We're partners on this journey, and we are helping them with bringing forward what they need, like unpacking the baggage that they've been carrying that they maybe don't need to keep carrying. So as we teach and as we learn more about it, you know, we are empowered by what we learn. James, would you like to add to that analogy?
No, I think you said it perfectly.
Thank you. And you tell me if any of these are just not what's going on in your state. But I tried to look at your states, and I was ruining some of the work some of you have to do to get background checks. Like in California, you have to go county by county. Is there anybody from California on the list right now? I'm trying to see.
It looks like we have Brent from San Francisco.
Yeah, I'd be very, very interested if this is accurate, because if this is inaccurate, let me know. You all know how to reach me, either through Basecamp or through email. But the only state that I saw any fees on was Georgia, and that was a $15 fee to do its search. And then each one of these is different, slightly different on how you find it. And this will be on Basecamp, and in the slides that are sent out to you. This may be helpful. And you know what? If you've been case managing, you've already done this. So I just wanted to pull it together so that I had a better understanding of what you go through as well for us. And if you hadn't done it, here is something to look at. And questions and answers. So are we going to be able to have people either raise their hands or unmute, which is that we want to do for question answer?
Well, people can put their questions in the questions box or the chat box, and we can read them out. Also, if people felt like they wanted to raise their hand, we can unmute them and they can ask directly. Either way is fine. Well, I don't think we have any right now. So I wanted to ask you all a question just to sort of get things started a little bit. As you all were talking, I was like, oh my God, you know so much about this topic, and I wonder, like, how long does it take? I mean, at some point you all were new at your jobs, and I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the difference and what it's like to do this and have this conversation as a sort of more kind of newbie kind of person. I'm just thinking about how I would do if I were sitting down with somebody trying to have this conversation. I think I'd have some difficulty, you know, and I don't know a lot about, you know, the criminal justice system. I don't know a lot about records. And, you know, and so how do you gain all of this knowledge? Is it just experience, or are there specific ways in which you were developed in this area? If you could just talk, I guess, a little bit about that, would be great.
You know, I can only tell you this the way I would guide anybody to. This is going to sound really weird. I am no different today than I was 42 years ago when I started. The one tool I have always had is absolute curiosity. And how can I find an answer to something on my own first? And then collecting resources along the way. So today I think it's good because I don't have to look up the same amount of things, and we have this technology that helps us at a fingertips, we can get information. So I feel that, you know, that the biggest skill you can have is the desire. Actually, I don't know if this is a skill, but the biggest quality that you can have is a desire to learn and to just be open to learning, being a lifelong learner. And that's probably the most important drive that you can have, is just be open. You don't know the answers. And I don't know any answers still. I'm still learning. And every time James speaks, he's saying something and I go, oh, okay, very good. That's it. Collect your stories, keep collecting them, and keep pulling from them. How do you learn? You ask the people around you. You look up things. You use every tool there is. And if you don't know the tool, ask about a tool. James, I'll pass that back to you.
I employ the powers of self-doubt and confusion. Whenever I get too many facts, I get overwhelmed. And the question I'm always asking myself, well, with anything like legal or otherwise, like, what is this? What are the exceptions? And how can this be applied? You're right about collecting resources. I have paper files and I scan in stuff that drives people crazy. We're not legal professionals. I think partnering with a good resource in your area that you can have come in and speak to staff, or just a good contact that you can call and ask questions of is always a wise idea. But whenever I'm presented with something, I'm like, what is this? Like, I never feel confident in the knowledge because knowledge changes and it's all kind of relevant. So it usually there's this whole process you go through. It's, okay, what is this? How am I going to handle this? What are the options? It's exhausting, frankly. But then
It is exhausting.
But then I email Sylvia and I'm like, or Kristen Lasko. Do you know how many times during the day I email Kristen Lasko and I'm like, Kristen, I have a housing question. With people that really have this like sort of like really specialized area, like type of knowledge, calling them like it's about networks and resources and reaching out to people, and because no one person knows everything and there's always new stuff coming down the road or places losing resources, losing funding. So it's all, I'm just flailing constantly. I flail.
I think that you know, having kind of that insecurity about your knowledge is really helpful, and also being really open to other people. I don't know everything and I want to know everything, and I know I can't hold all that information, but I do know that another tremendous strength that I have is the development of networks.
Yeah.
And bringing people together and asking questions and saying, hey, I don't know this. Can you teach me that? I can, you know, and there's always a quid pro quo because I've usually got something to share and I will, you know, and just always matching resources and needs.
And the law is all about delineation, it's all about exceptions and rules. And it's just, there's like, if I had the time to go to law school, I would, but I'm not going to. So I just call people. There's a bunch of resources in Boston. I'd love to hear about other states, what they have for like legal and housing support resources. Whenever I run into someone else at a conference or in passing, I always kind of pick their brain and get a business card, keep it on file.
Yeah.
And then I just ask another question, a follow-up to that kind of, so, you know, endorsing this approach that you all are talking about, like that part of success in gaining housing and or employment for folks with criminal histories. Why is this approach so much more important than just sort of in engaging the client to sort of have the power to frame their how they think about and how they talk about their criminal histories? Why is that an important approach as opposed to doing something different to change the system, for instance?
To change the system, I mean, I would love to change the system, and I realize that that's not a route that I can do. Mm-hmm. I can, you know, for me, it's sharing with the person we're serving some of the frustrations that we have with the system, so they don't feel alone. Like, oh my God, that sounds awful what you went through.
Yeah.
Oh. Because we are building an authentic relationship. That authentic relationship is the basis for everything in the future. And if our goal is housing and employment and a life that is ultimately emancipated from government assistance, I mean, we're only going to get there when we're working on these things in an open and honest way. And we are also have a shot at healing some of the effects of that trauma.
Yeah.
Any other way is just fighting with it. And I think that it's tremendously important to take this approach with people you serve. And some people will not be the people who can live with this approach. They want black and white, just do it, bump, 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 find out what works, do it that way, give me the bad news. Drop it, lay it on me right now. Pardon me?
Do you notice changes in your clients after, you know, taking this approach, or once they've gotten to a place where they feel much more comfortable with how they talk about their criminal histories? And if so, what do they change into?
I noticed. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say I do. Go ahead.
Yeah. I noticed changes in our relationship. I also noticed that we don't have to talk about it as much once we've had the conversation, a real one. And it becomes only a piece of the conversation as opposed to the focus.
Well, like, I wonder, are people who are more willing to, or feel like they've, you know, they've sat with you and were receptive to your coaching, and, you know, end up utilizing those skills, are those folks that end up having, you know, better outcomes?
I think that I recognize sometimes people are going to be receptive to coaching and really, you know, take some guidance from you about how to present, or sometimes they don't appear to be people who will be able to do it successfully, and that they will allow you to step in instead with that, because there are some people that shoot themselves in the foot with the anxiety they get looking at an apartment, and they have a tendency, you just kind of test it. I don't know if any of you all have seen this, and I am sure you have, bringing somebody to look at an apartment, and then all of a sudden their mouth is not attached to their brain anymore, and they're saying too much. It's too much, and we know that we are sunk because they're saying too much, because they are so anxious, and we learn from that. We come back out of there and we look at it and recognize that it is what it is. It isn't about having bad skills. It's about being anxious. So let me take the front step first. Let me take the lead next time, and then I'll pull you in when you've gotten used to it, and we'll figure that out. You'll let me know. And certain subjects will, you know, I know that you need a little coaching to drop it. You know, we'll develop a way that we work together to get what we need.
Yeah, I mean, I think the work that we do self-selects for people that are sort of most eager. But then there's a pool of people that you sort of bring in that also have some success. But I think the secondary gain is that, you know, people know they have an ally. So even if the outcome, even if the housing, that particular housing doesn't come through, they know they have an ally, and there can't an additional ally. There can't be anything bad about that. And sometimes people go to look at apartments, they realize maybe supportive housing is what I need. Like part of what you're saying, Sylvia, is finding out like sort of what made them so anxious that they're just blurting out stuff. Is it that their goal changed and they don't know how to tell you, or is it that they're just nervous because they've never met a landlord? Or it's tough to be under a microscope like that, but.
Yeah, it's all different things, and if you see something different with a person, you might also see that they asked really great questions, and you think, wow, you really took that in. It's a good job skill, and you know that. But no two people are the same, and we're changing constantly to adjust to the different styles everybody has.
Yeah. So we're pretty much out of time. Were there any just final thoughts you guys needed to get out before we just wrapped up here? I'm thinking no. Okay. Can you advance the next slide, Sylvia?
Yes, I can.
So if folks want to get in contact with you, and if they have additional questions about anything that you brought up during this webinar, they can contact you here, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the next slide. So the reminder, we'll see you at the multi-site meeting. James and Sylvia will be there as well.
Signing autographs?
Yes.
And that's it. So we wanted to just thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, James. We appreciate you being here and sharing your experiences with us. And thanks everyone who was able to join and listen in. And we will see you all soon.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
James, speak with you soon, and see you soon, everybody. Bye-bye.